There exists a figure in our society who poses the greatest threat to every system of control, not through violence or chaos, but through something far more dangerous: complete psychological independence. This person has achieved what most never will, and their very existence challenges the foundation upon which our entire social structure rests. Imagine walking through any major city today. Thousands of people rush past you, eyes glued to screens, chasing the next dopamine hit from social media, desperately seeking validation through likes and shares. They're trapped in an endless cycle of wanting more money, more status, more approval from strangers on the internet. But occasionally, you might encounter someone different. Someone who moves through this chaos with an unusual calmness, untouched by the frantic energy surrounding them. This person represents what Carl Jung called the individuated human being, someone who has completed the psychological journey toward wholeness. And their existence terrifies those who profit from human dependency. Our entire economic system depends on keeping people in a state of perpetual dissatisfaction. Every advertisement whispers the same message: you're incomplete without this product. Every political campaign promises external salvation: vote for us and we'll solve your problems. Every social media platform exploits the same psychological vulnerability: your worth depends on others' approval. But what happens when someone breaks free from this cycle entirely? Jung spent decades mapping the human psyche and discovered that most people live their entire lives wearing what he termed the persona, a carefully crafted mask designed to gain social acceptance. This mask becomes so convincing that individuals forget their authentic self exists beneath it. They become actors who have forgotten they're performing, slaves to roles they never consciously chose. The individuated person has done something revolutionary. They've peeled away these layers of false identity and integrated every aspect of their personality, including the parts society taught them to reject. This process, which Jung called individuation, creates someone who cannot be controlled through the usual mechanisms of manipulation. Consider what Jung called shadow work, the integration of our rejected aspects. Society conditions us to suppress anger, selfishness, and other dark impulses. But Jung discovered a paradox. When we deny these parts of ourselves, we become enslaved to them. We desperately seek external validation because we're terrified of being seen as flawed. We conform to others' expectations because we can't face our own darkness. The individuated person has looked directly at their worst qualities and made peace with them. They've said, "This is also me," without shame or denial. This integration creates profound psychological freedom because they no longer need others' approval to feel complete. They've already approved of themselves, the light and the shadow together. But Jung's process extends beyond shadow integration. He discovered that every person carries within them qualities typically associated with the opposite gender. Men carry what he called the anima, their inner feminine principle of intuition, emotion, and receptivity. Women carry the animus, their inner masculine principle of logic, assertion, and independence. Most people project these qualities onto others, seeking romantic partners to complete what feels missing within themselves. Men look for women to provide emotional depth, while women seek men for strength and direction. This creates codependent relationships where each person needs the other to feel whole. The individuated person has integrated these opposing forces internally. They've developed both their masculine and feminine aspects, becoming psychologically complete within themselves. They enter relationships not from neediness but from wholeness, seeking to share their completeness rather than fill a void. This inner integration culminates in what Jung called connection with the self, not the ego or persona, but the totality of who you are. This creates what I call inner authority, the ability to navigate life according to your own compass rather than external guidance. These individuals don't need experts, gurus, or influencers to tell them how to live because they've developed their own capacity for wisdom. Such psychological independence poses an existential threat to systems built on dependency. When someone stops needing external validation, they become immune to social media manipulation. When they integrate their shadow, they can't be controlled through shame. When they develop inner authority, they question everything, including the very systems trying to influence them. Educational institutions rely on what I call the expert dependency model, the belief that truth can only be understood through approved authorities. Students learn to regurgitate approved answers rather than develop critical thinking. But the individuated person has cultivated their own judgment and refuses to outsource their thinking to institutions, no matter how prestigious. Political systems depend on the savior complex, the belief that external leaders can solve internal problems. Campaigns promise that voting for the right candidate will fix the economy, end social problems, or bring meaning to empty lives. But the individuated person has taken responsibility for their own psychological development and understands that external change follows internal transformation. Consumer capitalism requires perpetual dissatisfaction. Advertisements create artificial needs by suggesting you're incomplete without specific products. But when someone has found completion within themselves, they become immune to this manipulation. They understand the difference between genuine needs and manufactured desires. Even relationships industries profit from the completion myth, the idea that you need another person to make you whole. Dating apps, romance novels, and relationship coaches all promote the belief that the right partner will solve your loneliness and insecurity. But the individuated person enters relationships from abundance rather than scarcity, seeking partnership rather than salvation. Social media platforms have perfected the art of exploiting validation addiction. The constant need for likes, comments, and shares keeps users engaged and generates advertising revenue. But someone who has developed a secure relationship with themselves doesn't need strangers' approval to feel worthy. They might use these platforms as tools, but aren't controlled by them. This psychological transformation creates what Jung observed as a contagious effect. When people encounter someone living authentically, it awakens their own dormant desire for authenticity. One genuinely individuated person can inspire countless others to begin their own journey towards psychological independence. This creates a ripple effect that threatens systems built on mass unconsciousness. Jung also warned about collective shadow projection. When large groups refuse to do individual psychological work, they project their unintegrated darkness onto scapegoats, other races, political parties, or foreign nations. The individuated person has integrated their own darkness and therefore can't be manipulated into hating external enemies. They found the enemy within and made peace with it. This immunity to collective projection makes them resistant to fear-based political messaging. They can't be scared into supporting wars against foreign threats because they've confronted the threat within themselves. They can't be convinced to surrender freedoms for promised security because they've found security within their own psyche. The creative implications of individuation are equally threatening to control systems. Jung discovered that authentic individuals naturally become more creative, expressing their unique perspective from inner necessity rather than external pressure. They create art that can't be bought, sold, or controlled by market forces because it comes from genuine inspiration rather than commercial calculation. This uncorrupted creativity threatens industries that profit from manufactured culture. When someone creates from authentic self-expression, they can't be controlled by market research or focus groups. Their art carries a power that resonates with others' suppressed authenticity, potentially awakening more people to their own creative potential. In our digital age, these qualities become even more valuable. We're bombarded with messages designed to keep us unconscious, social media algorithms that exploit our psychological weaknesses, targeted advertising that creates artificial needs, and polarized news cycles that trigger emotional reactions. The individuated person has developed psychological immunity to these influences. They can use technology as a tool without being used by it. They're not addicted to notifications because they don't seek external validation. They're not triggered by political content because they've integrated their own shadow. They're not manipulated by advertising because they know themselves and what they actually need. This immunity extends to their relationship with money and possessions. When you're clear about your authentic values, you stop buying things to fill psychological voids. You understand that status symbols are external markers of internal insecurity. You're not afraid of losing material possessions because your self-worth isn't tied to what you own. Such economic freedom, needing less rather than having more, threatens consumer capitalism's fundamental premise. Someone who doesn't need to consume constantly can't be exploited by industries that profit from manufactured dissatisfaction. Jung also discovered profound health benefits in individuation. When you stop running from psychological truth, your body stops manifesting that avoidance as illness. The integrated person experiences harmony between mind and body because they're not constantly fighting internal conflicts. They're not stressed about maintaining false personas or suppressing authentic impulses. They sleep better because they're at peace with themselves. They have more energy because they're not wasting it on psychological defense mechanisms. They age more gracefully because they're not fighting life's natural processes. Perhaps most significantly, individuation prepares someone for what Jung called the final individuation, death itself. The individuated person isn't afraid of death because they've already experienced ego death through the dissolution of their false persona. They've discovered something deeper and more enduring than their temporary identity. This gives them a quality that's both peaceful and powerful. They're not clinging to life out of fear, so they can live more fully. They're not avoiding death through denial, so they can embrace each moment more completely. So how does someone begin this dangerous journey towards psychological independence? First, practice what Jung called shadow spotting. Every time you judge someone harshly, ask yourself what quality you're rejecting in yourself. Your external judgments reveal your internal shadow. Instead of projecting these qualities onto others, own them as part of your complete personality. Second, develop persona flexibility. Notice when you're performing for others versus being authentic. Jung warned that the persona becomes dangerous when we identify with it completely. Practice being more genuine in low-stakes situations and gradually expand your authenticity into more significant areas of life. Third, cultivate inner dialogue. Jung discovered that the psyche naturally communicates through dreams, fantasies, and intuitive insights. Start paying attention to these internal messages instead of constantly seeking external input. Develop your own capacity for wisdom rather than always consulting experts. Fourth, integrate your anima or animus. Men should develop their intuitive, emotional, and receptive capacities. Women should claim their logical, assertive, and independent aspects. This integration creates psychological wholeness and reduces dependency on others for completion. Finally, establish connection with what Jung called the self, your deepest essence beyond ego and persona. This requires meditation, contemplation, or other practices that connect you with something larger than your ordinary identity, but found within your own psyche. Be warned, this process involves what Jung called the dark night of the soul. You'll confront everything about yourself that you've been avoiding. You'll face pressure from family, friends, and society to return to your old patterns. You'll experience authentic loneliness as some relationships reveal themselves to be based on mutual performance rather than genuine connection. But this temporary isolation creates space for authentic relationships with people who can love your real self. More importantly, you'll develop the most crucial relationship of all, your relationship with yourself. As you progress through individuation, you'll experience a fundamental power shift. Instead of seeking power from external sources, approval, status, control over others, you'll access your own inner power. This creates what Jung called quiet authority, a presence that doesn't need to announce itself, but is unmistakably genuine. People will sense that you operate from a different level of consciousness. You're not reactive or needy. You can't be manipulated because you're not seeking anything from them. You've become what Jung called a conscious individual in a world designed for unconscious masses. This consciousness is contagious. When others see someone living authentically, it awakens their own suppressed desire for authenticity. One individuated person can inspire dozens of others to begin their own journey towards psychological independence. This is how systems change, not through revolution, but through evolution of consciousness. When enough individuals achieve psychological independence, the systems that depend on mass dependency naturally collapse or transform. Jung warned that this process can't be shortcuts. You can't think your way to individuation or meditate around your shadow. You must do the actual work of integration, which requires considerable moral effort and psychological courage. But once you begin this journey, something remarkable happens. You discover that the freedom you've been seeking outside yourself was always available within. You realize that the validation you've been chasing from others was something you could give yourself all along. You become dangerous to systems of control, not because you want to destroy anything, but because you can't be controlled by anyone. You've achieved what Jung called the privilege of a lifetime. You've become who you truly are. And once you've tasted that level of psychological freedom, you can never go back to being unconscious. You've become immune to the manipulation that controls the masses. You represent an alternative to external authority, the possibility of inner authority. In a world designed to keep people hungry, wanting, and dependent, the person who needs nothing becomes the ultimate threat. Not because they're violent or destructive, but because they demonstrate that another way of being is possible. They prove that humans don't have to live as psychological slaves to systems designed to exploit their unconsciousness. They show that genuine freedom comes not from external circumstances, but from internal transformation. This is why the individuated person is society's greatest threat and its greatest hope. They represent humanity's potential for psychological evolution, the possibility that we can create a world based on consciousness rather than manipulation, authenticity rather than performance, inner authority rather than external control. The journey to psychological independence starts with a single step. The question is, are you ready to become dangerous to the systems that profit from your unconsciousness? Are you prepared to claim the privilege of a lifetime and become who you truly are? The choice, as Jung understood, is always yours. But once you begin walking this path, you join the ranks of those who cannot be bought, bullied, or broken. You become a conscious individual in a world desperate for people who can think for themselves. And that makes you the most dangerous person in any system built on control. Dangerous, not because you want to destroy, but because you refuse to be unconscious. You've awakened from the dream of dependency and discovered the reality of inner freedom. That awakening is your gift to yourself and your threat to any system that depends on your sleep.